Hello, everyone. I'm Mike. I'm not using the mic because I have to use two hands to drive the laptop. So if you can't hear me, let me know, and I will try and grow a third hand and figure that out. But I'm getting thumbs up from the back. OK, cool. I'm a technical artist at Side Effects. And I'm going to be showing you some stuff tonight, some tips and tricks. First and foremost, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who helped put this evening on tonight, and Eidos for providing this amazing space. So thank you so much for that. That's how we get together and we have these conversations. How many students do we have here tonight? OK, a couple. Nothing wrong with that. If you haven't already, by the end of tonight, please go just join a group, introduce yourself, get to know the community. We're generally pretty friendly people. We're not going to bite. And as you probably have heard, there is always a demand for Houdini users. So you probably would get something out of creating that relationship. So please go do that. OK, also, ask questions as you go. So I'm going to be going through a bunch of stuff today. But you don't have to wait till the end. Because I'm kind of jumping around, feel free at any point, kind of like I'll pause before I move on. You can just raise your hand and we'll jump into stuff like that. I think one of the best things about the user groups is that we can learn from each other. So you might see me doing something and go, why are you doing that way? You could do it this way. That's the whole point of this, is to kind of learn from each other as we go. So feel free to do that. I'm showing something that Marc-Andre actually built, so I'm probably going to screw it up. So I'm expecting something from him to show me what I did wrong there. So a couple of more questions. Who has been using Houdini for longer than 2 years? OK, less than 2 years? Interesting. OK, so it looks like about 50-50. How many are focused on real-time games versus offline, which would be film, commercials, motion graphics, that thing? So real-time and offline? OK. Well, that's kind of cool to see. Like, I'm part of the game dev group. I normally talk to game dev people, so it's nice to talk to film guys. You've probably seen some of this stuff before then. And then one last question. How many of you create digital assets? That is a good number. OK, great. Then you're going to hopefully get something out of tonight. So just a little bit of background if you don't know this already. I'm part of the game dev team. Our job is to make tools for Houdini using Houdini. So we make digital assets. We want to make it easier to get up and running. We want to integrate third-party plugins. And we also want to wrap up existing workflows. So in the last 2 years, I think we've built 150 digital assets in total. We don't seem to be slowing down, which is causing a problem for us, not for you. But through that, I've learned a lot about sort of just different things about digital assets. And so what I thought I would do tonight is take some time to kind of go through some of those tips and tricks, things that we've learned along the way. And then we'll see how we're doing for time. And I would like to show you the new Vertex animation texture node, because there's a lot of stuff going on over there. And then maybe even the new Substance plugin, because I believe people like Substance as well, and you might want to use them together. Cool. So that's kind of the plan. So let's see where we're going to start. OK, so I'm going to start with something really simple, but I don't know how many people do this, because you're going to see me doing this a lot. But I often jump between contexts really quickly, and that's because I've got shortcuts hooked up to my different contexts. And I think this is kind of something that stuck around from when I first started learning Houdini. So if you wanted to do that, it's actually pretty easy. You can go to pretty much any menu. And in this case, there is an option for objects, materials, chops, cops, and so on. And if you hold down, and I'm going to forget this, but I think it's Control, Shift, and Alt, and then click on one of those things, it'll actually bring up your hotkey manager. So it'll automatically take you to that thing that you want to create a shortcut for, and then you can set up your shortcut. So what I've done is I've actually set up Control 1, 2, 3, and 4 for my different contexts. And personally, I find that's a much quicker way to kind of move between the different contexts than using the GUI. So yeah, it's just a quick tip. Go to your option, Control, Shift, Alt, click on it, and it'll bring that up already in the hotkey manager for you to kind of set to whatever you want to use. This is a lot prettier, by the way. If anyone's been using Houdini for more than 3 years, you would have noticed that. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to very quickly touch on, which I guess isn't so much digital assets, but kind of is part of that, is packages. So in 17 or 17.5, we released this new packages system. Who here is using packages?
Any more details?
Sorry, let me be more specific. So instead of using your Houdini environment variable, you can use JSON files to describe where your OTLs are and that kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay, one hand. That's what I thought. We're really not great at marketing this stuff. Okay, so Marc-Andre is at the back. He actually wrote a lot of this stuff. So I apologize now for screwing this up, but I'm going to kind of go through the basics of it. So if you've ever had to install OTLs or anything else, you're probably used to having your Houdini.env file and then kind of setting a bunch of stuff. So that's not the right one to look at. That's the one you want to be looking at. So if you want to set your Houdini path, you would do it this way by kind of saying $Houdini path and then putting the folder that you want. The problem with that is the minute your system starts getting bigger and better, whether you've got Redshift running or Arnold or other things, this becomes a complete mess because you have to kind of constantly append to them. And so we basically have a new system, which is the packages system that uses JSON files. And the idea behind that is now what you have is you have something that looks like this. And so in my Houdini folder, let's go over here quickly. If you're on Windows, it would be Documents Houdini 17.5. If it was Mac, it would be Library Preferences. Linux, it would be Home, whatever. But the idea is now you can put a packages folder in there, and you can have multiple JSON files. So instead of having your single Houdini.env file, you can now break it out into separate files, and then those will all kind of combine together to give you your environment. So for the film guys, you probably have a TD who's already looked at this and they haven't. I suggest recommending it to them because it will save them a lot of trouble. Same for the game guys. Most of you are used to using setting your environments with a launcher or something as you go.
Is there any documentation about how it's resolved, if there will be conflicts or anything?
Yeah, there is. So there is an entire page which doesn't want to show up. Where did you go? No, we don't want that. So yeah, you can actually just search for Houdini packages, and it'll give you all of the rules and how stuff resolves and what's going on there. So more than enough examples of that. And if it doesn't do what you want it to do, let us know. We can figure it, we can make changes, and we can respond to that. So for those of you like, okay, but why should I care? Let me quickly show you an example where, let me turn this off. There we go. And yes, I'm doing live demo, which is like the worst idea possible, but we'll do it anyway. So one of the things that I do a lot, obviously, with developing the game dev tools is I have a GitHub repo for a folder where we store these tools, and that's often my development stuff. But every now and again, I've actually got to test the stuff we're releasing. So the thing is, I have exactly the same set of tools, but in 2 different locations. So I need a quick way to be able to say, load these, don't load those, and that's where this stuff kind of comes in handy. If you aren't familiar, the game dev tools can be downloaded directly from within the shelf, and then that puts it in a specific folder. Now, right now, if I type game dev, I am getting something in here, and I can see where that's coming from by checking my path. Okay, so that's library preferences. So this is currently using the release version of the game dev tools. And the way that that's happening is I've actually got 2 files in here. I've got one which is game dev tools dev, and another one which is release. And I could put these in one file as well. I just kind of separated them out to have a look at it. But in each of those files, and I'll kind of show you what's going on here, is this enable flag as well. So I'm able to basically say, before I load Houdini, to enable or disable these. So right now what I've got is, they're actually both set to false, which is a little strange. What did I do wrong there? So the idea is I should be able to, see, live demo stuff always breaks when it shouldn't.
No, it's not actually saved. So that's probably true on this.
Thank you so much. Exactly. Someone knows Sublime. Okay, so I'll close this down again and we'll load this up. So they both are now currently set to false, which means when I load Houdini, that should mean that I don't get any game dev tools. And you probably know where this is going at this point. So let's just confirm that. Nope, they're still coming up. I wonder if I missed something else. Maybe it's still in here. Yes, it is. Well, that's why it's loading. So let's save that. And then it'll hopefully work. Okay. Okay, so basically all the game dev tools start with game dev. I've just tabbed and typed game dev. They're not showing up over there, which means nothing is essentially loaded. And then all I can do is I can close down Houdini. I can go to one of these, and let's say that I want my development one. I can change that to true and save that again. And now when I load Houdini, it will specifically load the development stuff because that's the path that I've given. So this is a much cleaner, more kind of intuitive way to deal with setting up your environment. I suggest you check it out and use it. So now you can see that I'm actually getting game dev tools there. If I go to my geometry container, you'll get a better idea of it. And there's all the tools showing up. So very quick introduction. I'm not going to be exhaustive beyond that. If you do want to learn more about it, go and check it out in the docs. But it is worth mentioning because no one put up their hands, and clearly that's a new thing. Yeah.
So I was just wondering, does the package is file need to be located in the installation, or can it be like located somewhere else? Because for the Houdini Meet-up end, the advantage is that you can put it everywhere, and you can just like put it. For example, with Houdini engine, you can like manually specify which Houdini environment that you want to use.
Yeah, so that's interesting because I know with Unity, for instance, we have a specific Houdini end file that you can point to as well, and then you can have that on a network. I don't know if we've looked at that yet for the packages stuff.
That's exactly what we are doing. Like we're using it for deploying like a custom package. We're using it here.
Yeah.
And it's really useful because we can put it anywhere, and we have like a good process that kind of create the head that we want. So it would be really convenient to have like the same thing because the package is not easier to manage.
Yeah.
But if we have like it just specify a little path.
So I'm going to make an assumption here, but I think, so what you want to be able to do is point to one location, just update that location, and all the machines will get access to that. So you want a kind of combination of Houdini end and packages almost.
Yes, something like that.
Yeah.
Because like in the end is still useful for if let's say if you want to if you have a custom Python like package whatever that you want to use, you can specify it in your head. Let's say if you want to use a package, it would be inconvenient. And the thing is that you don't want to need to modify the installation of the user. Because in the case where you are deploying version of the user, and after that you have another or if you don't deploy your package, would be really interesting if you can deploy the package and include the package file inside of it. And so like when you're loading Houdini, working can gather all the package. Right?
Well, that's kind of the idea. That's really kind of what we're going for. So if I could be making the wrong assumption here, but because it's part, you have the packages folder. If you have a Houdini path which points to like a central location, and there's a packages folder in there, then you can basically load whatever you want from that. But you can also choose based on what version of Houdini you're loading, which packages you want to load. So you can actually set up your environment exactly how you want it. And that's kind of why we did this, because we think this is it's a more pipeline-friendly way of handling the stuff than having like a crazy Houdini in file which just has everything in it. Yeah, I would say have a look at the docs. If it doesn't do what you want it to do, give us a shout and we can help out. Yeah. Okay. So let's actually get to some Houdini stuff. Okay. So we do a lot of work in COPs. How many people use COPs here? A couple of hands. Okay. It's kind of the lesser known context within Houdini. But it's something we use a lot in the game dev team because we're often like prepping textures or we're generating textures. And it has a couple of quirks. And so, what I'm going to try and show you today is some of the ways to get around some of those, but then also some other possibilities for using Heightfields in conjunction with COPs to kind of speed things up. So the first thing I want to talk about is the mosaic node, because if you're working in game dev, you often have to create texture sheets. And I'll come over here. Nope, I don't want this one. Go. Yeah, so I will grab this and I'll kind of just do it again. Okay. So if you have like a texture sequence, so I've just taken something that I used ages ago, and I want to make a texture sheet out of that. We have something called the mosaic node, which if you don't know about it already, you will now. And the idea behind the mosaic node is that it essentially creates a sprite sheet, a texture sheet of all of those images of your file sequence. So for the film guys who are like, why? We need to get this into the game engine, so you bring in the entire sequence all in one go. The problem with this node is that it actually uses its settings up here, so images per line and max images, to set how many frames it's going to pull from that sequence. But it also uses the timeline. So if I change my current frame, it actually picks a different set of images to then load into that texture sheet. And this has caused numerous problems because someone will be working through their simulation, they'll put down a mosaic node, and they'll be halfway through their time sequence, and they're like, it's broken, it doesn't work. And we've had problems with this with rendering, we've had problems just with people using it. So I had a chat with one of the guys, one of the devs, and he basically showed me how to get around this because it's not intuitive, but it's worth knowing. So the trick is actually to use something called the extend node. And what that actually does is it basically holds the frames beyond and before a certain sequence, which makes sense once you think about it. But what doesn't make sense to me and still doesn't is the order I'm placing these in. But ideally what I'm going to do is I'm going to say hold on both sides. And that's not going to do anything just yet because I'm still reading in the entire sequence. But if I go to my file node and I specifically say I want to override the frame range, and let's say that I want to start at frame 14 and I only want 16 frames, then that is going to be locked. So if I have a look at this, at how this is playing, this is going to play and then it's going to disappear. But with the mosaic node, same problem. Like it's only going to give me something on the first frame. But if I add the extend node, that actually now holds it. So little tip, if you are ever using mosaics, just remember use the extend with it. I actually went and basically updated all of the game dev tools to include this now as well so that we don't run into this problem of it just rendering black frames. Cool. And I'm going to add one little tip to this as well, because whenever you're dealing with texture sequences and you're using the mosaic node, you could potentially create a really big image. So let's say that you've actually rendered out 2K images and you decide to do an 8x8 texture sheet. That's going to be a 16K image that you generate. And COPS is going to say, no, that's not possible, and it's going to freak out. And the reason is because we actually have a hard or a soft limit on the number of pixels. Another thing that a lot of people don't know about, but if you actually go to the preferences and you go to compositing, there is a resolution limit And so if you ever run into this where it's failing and you have a really big texture and you don't know why, it's because we do actually cap it at 10,000. So this is probably more for the film people. If you are doing 16K stuff in cops or 32, then you probably want to do it in here. Random question. Anyone in games using 16K textures in their game? And if so, you must have really nice tech artists. Yeah.
Okay, so we're not using 16K. I actually had an issue with the Heightfields at one point. We had a huge Heightfield and it wasn't exporting. And my coworker actually went in the node and overwrote something that allowed it to export. I'm wondering if there's like a limit on that, potentially, the amount of tiles you can export.
Well, the tiles are being exported as textures, so they are coming through cops. So it is possible, like if you were running into this limit, but I doubt the tile would have been 10,000 pixels plus. Maybe?
I'd have to take a look again.
Yeah. But that is possible. So that could be happening inside the HDA, and then you'd kind of miss that stuff. So that's, yeah. You might have to just dive inside and see if you're getting any errors or warnings there. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. What else we got here? Okay. So editable nodes. So talking specifically about digital assets, let's have a look at this. How many people here have used editable nodes in digital assets? Okay, a couple of hands, not too many. Oh, fair amount now. The reason I want to go over this is because we actually created a bunch of assets at some point with editable nodes, and it has caused nothing but pain for a year and a half. And so I've had to like go back and basically refactor a lot of our assets to avoid them. But the basic idea is if I create say a container and create a subnet out of that, and we'll just dive inside here. I don't know, I'll put something like a box and I'll just do some noise on it. If I, well, that's probably not an example. Let's do a sphere instead. Okay, there we go. Something a little bit more exciting. If you create a digital asset out of this, we'll call this mhug edit and save that. Then when you do that, you actually have the option in your node option here to set something to an editable node. And in fact, I should probably drop in a container because that would make more sense. So I'll put in a material network in here. And then we will try and drag and drop that. There we go. I think I can do subnet 1. No, let's actually do that. Apply, accept. Okay. So essentially what this means now is if I create another one of these and I drop it down, you'll notice that generally when you go inside a digital asset, everything's grayed out. But if you have an editable node, it's actually not grayed out. And the reason is because you can edit stuff inside of it. So this allows users to do things if they want to kind of add to a digital asset. The problem is a lot of TDs and TAs try and get around the problem of creating a workflow with Python or something by using editable nodes. So for instance, you might create a script that says, if I have 4 objects, generate 4 materials for me. And so you will basically you need an editable node so you can do that. The issue with that is any changes you make to the digital asset doesn't affect the editable node. So if I was to dump a bunch of stuff down here, and I'll just put a material builder, for instance, and then let's say that I've done a bunch of work and I go, okay, let's save that. I mean, it's not even being edited at the moment, but if I save that and then expect to see that node in there that I just created, I'm like, sweet, okay, that's in there. But if I drop down a new one, please work. Oh, okay, that actually has now gone in. Live demos, like I said, doesn't always work. But the idea is that your stuff that is being saved in there is not guaranteed to always stay the same, and it could cause problems if you're modifying what's inside of that.
If you already have something existing and you update the asset, then you expect to get
Yes,
to propagate to what you already have in a scene.
Yes, thank you. So if you already have something in there and you expect that to propagate to the others, you're not going to see those changes. So we can do a bunch of work and then save it and send it on and go, well, it's working on my side. Why is it not working on your side? And so that's the problem. So what I want to show you is where actually using editable nodes is a good idea. And one of the ideas for that I've used in the past is with volume manipulation. So I'm going to kind of just show you what I've got here to kind of speed things up. But essentially what I've got is just a very basic, we'll hide these because we don't want them, is just a sphere that I've turned into a volume, and then I'm running some noise on it. So that noise is coming from this guy over here. Now, if I wrap this up, so I'm going to create a subnet out of this, call this volume, except I'm going to hopefully get this right. Okay. So I've got that over there, but then what I've also got is I've got a material net with a CVEX shader. So one of the things you can actually do with a volume VOP is you can choose what your source is. So instead of using what's inside here, you can actually point it to a CVEX shader. So in this case, I could say, change it to shop, and then I can point it to whatever is inside this guy. So in here, I've just got some very basic logic that says if the density is above a Y value, then keep it. If it's below, then get rid of it. So the way that this works out as a digital asset is, let's go over here. I want mental nodes, matnet1, CVEX builder 1. I'll save that. Okay. And so now what I can do is I can put down another one of these. We'll do that. And basically what this means now is I can dive inside and I can go here. So there's probably something else that I want to show you as well with building digital assets. The other thing you can do is you can also decide with a digital asset where you go to when you double click on it. And so if I just come back here, and you'll see that we've got a dive target. I'm actually going to copy this and paste this here as well and accept that. So let that update. So what that now means is when I double click on my asset, it'll immediately take me straight into that location. So the whole idea here is that you can build a digital asset that you can then give to other users, and they don't have to worry about the guts of it. But at the same time, if they want to, they can dive inside and you can specify where they go. So what I could now do is I could expose, say, this switch over here to my my digital asset, and I'll keep this simple by just doing a toggle, and we'll call this user CVEX, whatever it is, and then I'm going to hook that up to. Would put it all the way down there. Copy that. Paste this over here. Okay. Interesting. Oh, of course, I've got more than one, so let's hide that. So all I'm doing here is I'm just saying, like, choose between either the stuff that's inside the volume VOP or use the stuff that's inside this custom CVEX. So what this means now is if I turn this on, I can dive inside that. So actually, let me use the one that's locked so we can see this working. If I save node type, there we go. Turn that on. Now I can dive inside and I can basically start doing custom stuff. So if I want, I can even just override it. I can do whatever I want. So this means that you have the benefit of this thing being editable, but you're being very specific. You're saying to the user, hey, I don't mind you messing around in here, and that can still be passed to the rest of the system, but otherwise don't touch. That's the whole point of digital asset, like kind of keeps it separate. So that's really the way that they should be used. That's kind of the key ingredient. If you ever find yourself building a digital asset and you've made something editable because you're trying to get around the fact that stuff is locked down, you probably aren't doing it the right way. You probably need to find a different way to handle that situation. I feel like I went through that pretty quickly and jumped around. Any questions? Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's editable nodes. Have a look at them.
By the way, what was the thing that you guys saw beyond the propagation thing? Was there other things? Or?
Oh, so the pain is, so I don't know if we still have an example of this, but so we have a bunch of game baker nodes. We have the game res, games baker, and there's an LOD create. They're all based on the baked texture op. So games baker, yeah, I think it's this one. So this has inside of it, so up here is the old version of the baked texture of the games baker. And essentially what we had was these were all editable nodes, and depending on what the user set at a level above, a Python script would run and disable and enable different nodes and then render them and do various things. So there was one problem that we had there. But then the other problem we had was this node was being used inside of other nodes. So we actually have a LOD create as well as I think it's the game res node. And these have this HDA has an HDA inside of it, and that HDA, has an HDA inside of it. And that's where the baked texture is working. So what I've just shown you is the worst possible way to do like digital asset management. But that was the problem we were running into is if you make something editable and then you're now using that inside another digital asset, there's almost no way to know what's going on at that kind of level. So
Flag it to the asset above to saying also make this editable so that I can still change it.
It's sometimes not, sometimes yes.
yeah, so it's not so much that you have to let the parent asset know that the bottom one is editable. It's just the fact that when you start chaining that stuff together, it just becomes a mess to manage. You could have something fail and not know why. If you have an editable node and you're creating nodes inside of it, and you have a script that then deletes those nodes, and that script never runs because it fails somewhere else, now you've got all these dummy nodes that are just sitting there and kind of doing that. So, yeah. How are we doing for time? 8:46. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the reason that we had to go and redo a lot of stuff, but I thought it was worth mentioning to you as well. Okay, let's see, what else we got here? So I'm going to just very quickly, I know Benoit was like, if you don't want to learn Vex, you don't have to learn Vex. And what I love is everyone can have their own opinion. You should learn Vex. I mean, you can do so much with Houdini just with the nodes, and that's a great place to start. But I think every now and again a little snippet, and I think what I loved that Benoit showed was just like those one-liners. Like that's really where the power comes in, when you can do these sort of simple things quickly with just a line or two. But if the one thing that you might or might not know is that COPS actually doesn't have a wrangle. So every other context has one except for COPS. So if you go inside and you try and do wrangle, there isn't one. But you can actually make one yourself. So
Next level.
Chops doesn't have a wrangle too.
that is correct. Chops doesn't have it. I think it might have something to do with threading. So yeah, Tops probably doesn't because it's pretty new as well. Okay, fine. There's more than like 2 contexts that don't have it. Yeah. The reason I'm bringing up no?
Object.
Yeah, object doesn't have it either. Okay. I get the point.
I mean, you can do that.
But I think the beauty of using VOPs or wrangles is you kind of get to work how your brain works. So if you're more of a visual programmer, then you can use VOPs to put down nodes and kind of build out your systems. If you come from more of a programming background, or if you just prefer looking at code, wrangles are generally the way you want to go. They both do the same thing. What I found that's interesting is making something is different from other people reading it. So if you've ever opened up someone else's VOP network to try and understand what they're doing, and they haven't cleaned it up, or they're not kind of like spacing stuff out, it's a nightmare. Like, it'll take you a good hour just to like figure out what's going on. And I think that's where code actually does become more useful, because you can read it. Like, if someone actually is kind enough to put comments in, you can follow it line by line and go, okay, I think I understand what's going on here. So that's why I think using wrangles for that purpose is a good idea. Start with VOPs if you want to kind of prototype, and then switch over to wrangles if you can. So like I say, there isn't one in COPS, but you can basically make one. So what you do have in COPS is snippets. And a snippet is essentially the building block for a wrangle. If I actually go back up to here and I drop down a wrangle, and I double click on that, inside of that is a VOP. So we're cheating here, and inside of that is a snippet node. That's essentially what's going on underneath the hood. So you can actually make one yourself by simply dropping down a snippet. The only difference is that the language is a little bit different. So I have an example over here. Yep. So we'll have a look at this guy quickly. If I have, say, a bunch of butterflies that come with Houdini, thanks, then what I can do is I can put down a VOP cop if I want to do changes. But then inside of that, let's kind of have a look at what's going on here. I've got my snippet. And one of the things that kind of annoys me with cops is RGB are separated out, like by default. And when I'm thinking about color, I just want to think about color. I don't want to have to do that. So I often kind of just take all of them, wrap them into a single thing with a float to vector. And in this case, I put down a null specifically so I can give it the name CD as an output. And then I'm plugging that into a snippet. So my snippet now is basically a wrangle. The only difference is we're not seeing the little @ sign, because we're now dealing directly with vex as opposed to vex expressions. And you can have a look in the docs to kind of understand it. But now I can kind of write my simple lines of code to do things that I could probably also do with nodes. But if I want someone to be able to read it later, or if your brain works better with this, then that's how you would go about doing it. And to give you an example of where I've actually used that, I've used it in the new Vertex animation textures node. So in here, sorry, I'm really bad at cleaning stuff up, I apologize. But one of the things I needed to do was, this is basically a cleaned up network, because this actually has inside of it this guy, which is a whole bunch of weird and wonderful stuff. And there's also a whole bunch of stuff happening over here. So if you try and read that and expand that out, it becomes a nightmare. But essentially what's going on over here, and I'll talk more about it when I talk about Vertex animation textures, is I want to take each vertex, figure out its position, for instance, and then write that to a pixel. So I need to get the coordinate or the system that says this is the vertex value, and then convert that into a pixel space or a texture space, and then write that out. And so I was doing some prototyping where I was trying to do different ways of reading the vertices and doing the pixels. And it was actually a lot easier for me to write that as code, because I could kind of see what I was doing. So this is an example of where it's basically taking all of the same inputs, but instead of looking at this, where if you'd never seen this before, it would probably take you a while to figure out, you've got something on the right which you still need to do a little bit of reading to figure out what's going on. But as long as there are some comments and things are named properly, you'd probably be able to get the gist of what's going on from that a lot quicker. So that's kind of where I see the balance between the two, depending on what you want to do.
It should be faster. It is using switches, and switches are producing if-else inside when they compile to Vex. So if you have the same things in this, it should be faster than this because the switch will evaluate every input every time.
Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, the switches in this case in the VOP would be slower because, like you say, they're evaluating both sides. Whereas in there, I'm not doing any of that. That's actually just a streamlined version. So instead of giving the different options, I've just picked a single path and basically just prototyped that over there.
Even if you use ifs, it will be faster. It will be faster.
Oh yeah? Because of the way it compiles down? Well, I guess because it is compiling down to...
So the switch, it's going to the sequence of the, it's like the ternary operator. So it evaluated both inputs every time. We're just multiplying with the amount of the things you have. And when you have if, it's like normally on the processor, it's going to you have the branch prediction and stuff like that.
Okay. That's getting very low level. That I understand what you're saying, but I hope I remembered half of that. But yeah, that's like that, so I think that's getting back to this idea of like how comfortable are you with the code as opposed to the logic of the visual nodes. If you want to get fast, if you want to be performant, you're going to have to start using code at some point. If you just want to prototype, it's totally fine to just use the nodes to kind of work that stuff out. Yeah.
My only point about this code versus Node is that I started with a soft image, so ice, and when I started, there's a lot of little mind tools that I didn't have because I came from an artistic background. So I found that nodes are very good for discovery, trying to see if an idea works. And I find, of course, like code is much better for archiving than discovery. So I do miss a bit of that because there's a lot of functions that are not available in ROPS, for example. So if you want to do some let's say print points, like you don't have it in ROPS. So I jumped completely on bikes, but I do miss that because when you know something, it's fine, but when you don't know, like copying and pasting code around, like this is much nicer to say, well, what about if I do this first and that second? Oh, okay, this works.
Yeah.
So that's the only.
Yeah, you can kind of move it around. Just a show of hands, who uses VOPs more than say Wrangles? And Wrangles? Wow. Interesting. Okay. So just to your point, and I think this is a big thing with nodes, is discoverability. Sometimes you just want to kind of hit tab and go, I know it's in here somewhere, I just got to figure out what it is, whereas finding the functions can actually sometimes be a little bit more tricky in the documentation. To your point of sometimes some stuff hasn't been implemented as a node, but it is available as a Vex function. That's where the snippet node comes in again. So you can literally write a one-liner that at least you can get access to that. But I know what you mean. Like there are times when like there's stuff that you can't find basically. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So let's actually look at something a little bit prettier because code is nice, but let's see what else we got. So one of the other things I want to show. Yeah.
One question. Do you sometimes use inline instead of snippet?
Yeah, so you can use inline or you can use snippet.
In which case do you use?
Ooh, I don't actually have a good answer for that.
I remember there's a difference in the way it generates the code, but I don't know exactly.
So the first question, I guess, is do we have access to both here? We do. So we have snippet and we have inline. I don't know.
I think inline, if you declare a variable in a inline and you do another inline, then you can get a name flash, I think.
Yeah.
Snippet, no, but I don't master there's a difference, but I don't.
Yeah. To be honest, I don't think I've ever run into a case where I've had to make that choice. I generally just use snippets, and I find it gives me what I need. Maybe it's because most of the time I'm writing snippets, I'm writing small things, so that's how my brain kind of focuses on it. But I'm going to ask when I get back to the office, because it's a good question.
Can you declare a function in a snippet?
I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah?
You
Yeah.
can even declare a structure, but you need to use a trick.
Okay, so yeah, so it sounds like you can, but it depends on
No,
how.
you can function. Function runs well,
Yeah.
either they're constant or not. But if you want to declare the structure, it's a bit more tricky.
Okay.
I haven't
Yeah.
used much inline, but I think the only advantage is that the snippet adapts as you change data type. And I think in inline you have, maybe I'm wrong, because I haven't
Okay.
used inline much, but you have
You'd
to
have
be
to be
very
explicit.
specific. You have to declare the attributes, the data type into.
Yeah.
And I think the snippet, if you connect something else, it will change to that data type.
Yeah, that sounds right. So I think, yeah, that makes sense. The fact with inline, you have to be specific with your types. But with the snippet, I mean, when I did this with CD, I literally just did CD and it knew that it was a vector and it kind of just passed it through. So that might be one of the reasons. But yeah. Okay, moving on to some Heightfield stuff. So this actually came up about a month ago where someone was using our volume to texture node. So we have this, if I can find it, there we go. So we have this little digital asset that basically takes a volume and then creates from that volume a texture sheet. This is great if you want to bring it in to use it with Reinbruch's volume rendering system in Unreal. I'm sure Unity's got some stuff for that as well, but I think more and more people are going, well, Houdini has all these great volume tools. Can I use those, but then bring that into the game engine in some interesting kind of way? And someone brought up the fact that they were trying to not only use this for a static volume, they were trying to use it for a simulation. So they were taking something like, that is not it. Did I close the file? I closed the file and it didn't save. Let's just make sure I'm in the right place. Hang on here. Two. Yep. Geo. Okay, right in front of me. So I've just got a very simple example here of an explosion kind of happening over 24 frames. And basically what he was doing was he was trying to actually write this out as multiple texture sheets into, we'll just grab density. Or let's do heat. Okay. He wanted to write that out. So if I actually plug this into this guy over here, we'll let it run its course. And I don't know if this will even work because it might we might have logic inside that stops it from working. But you can see at the moment it's cooking and it's taking a ton of time, and all it should basically be doing is taking these slices of a volume and repackaging them as a texture. It's not a ton of work really, and that's why it's failing, so I'll just change that there. So the reason it turns out is because a lot of this is actually happening in COPS, and COPS is actually single threaded most of the time. So if you're trying to do a lot of pixel operations, then you're going to run into this problem, especially if you're dealing with really big textures or you've got multiple compositing nodes happening all at once. Let's see if this decides to work. Okay. Fails. Okay, so that's not even working. We'll go back to this and I'll talk through it in a second. So the thing that I want to show you is you can actually use Heightfields as textures because the advantage of Heightfields is that they are multi-threaded. So you can do a lot of your processing in the Heightfield and then send that to COPS. So you're still able to write out textures, do whatever else you want to do, but you do have the advantage of kind of the speed. That was the big kind of change. But the reason I want to show this to you is because I think there's a lot of use cases that you could try this out with, whether it's doing terrain work or whether it's texture processing. And so I thought I'd just kind of go through what that looks like. So just starting very simply with a height field, I've changed it so that it's basically, I'm thinking of it like a texture. It's got 512 by 512 voxels, and then 1 voxel there. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create 3 more fields, layers, for my color. So this is going to just use the information I got from my initial height field. And now what I can do is, in a volume wrangle, I can start doing stuff like setting the mask, or I can start setting one of those channels. So you can think about red, green, or blue separately. And just to see what that actually looks like, I've got a volume visualization that I've put down. So the key here is, because this is kind of what catches people out, is how do you visualize color for a height field? And it's actually by using the volume visualization set to emission, or using the emission side of things. And that's where I'm kind of doing the color field. So all I've done here is a really simple example of like a UV texture space. I've got red going from 0 to 1 in the one direction, and green 0 to 1 in the other direction. And that creates that. But then what you can actually do is you can bring this height field into COPs. So I have a COPnet over here, and I have a SOP import. And a SOP import will bring in a volume. So the name is a bit of a kind of, it's a little confusing because you would look for volume, but this is specifically for volumes. But essentially what this does is it will pull in the volume data, and it actually has some options where you can just set the resolution and set the plane. So it will automatically figure out what the resolution of the height field is, as well as the fields that you want to bring in, and then creates a texture, an image out of that. So if I have a look over here, I've actually now got an image plane CD that I can use there. So I'm basically able to do all of my processing up here in something like a volume wrangle or a bunch of other things. And then I'm importing that into COPs. And the only reason I'm bringing it in here is so that I can write it out. So I can actually generate a texture from that. But to show you an example of kind of how that would work and why you might care, this is using the old setup. And I'm going to cancel that for a second and go back here. And like I said, you can see that this is taking a pretty long time to cook. I'll dive inside so you can kind of see the guts of why this is taking as long as it does. I'm not even going to wait. But essentially, we've got a COPnet, which is kind of doing something like I just showed you or explained, where what I want to do is take the resolution of the image, and then I've got an index for each of those pixels. And then I'm converting that index into a position value. And I'm saying, give me the volume density at that position. So that's all happening inside of here. That's what this little mess is over here. But the thing is, it's literally having to happen per pixel on a single thread. So that takes a really long time to do. And you kind of got a sense there of what it's taking to do. So instead of doing that, what I actually did was I basically refactored this by using height fields in a volume wrangle. So everything you just saw inside that little VOP network is now represented inside of this wrangle. And this is going to take a while because it's still using the old system. And it's going to crash. What would a live demo be without a crash? Yeah, I think we have lost it. Bring this back.
So would there be a chance that maybe in the future you can sort of use the same approach to make the processing ops faster or something like that?
Yeah, so the question is...
Yeah, because when I started with height fields, I actually thought, wow, this looks all very image-based workflow. The things that you're doing, the same that you would do in a compositor, but I'm actually not doing in COPs. And so I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, so the question is, well, if you can do this for Heightfields, why don't we fix COPS to do this as well? COPS needs a lot of love. We're kind of a couple of years behind now on where COPS could be. And so I guess what I'm showing you is how to get around the limitations right now, because I think ideally we would like this stuff to be happening directly in COPS and you wouldn't have to be jumping through hoops to make it happen. But I can safely say that it might be a while before you see those changes happening. So that's why we show you this stuff. So the thing that I wanted to show you is just the difference in, and I've lost this again, haven't I? Okay, I'll just bring this back. Volume sim, that is just the difference in the speed once you kind of get that working. Because if I take this just kind of very simple simulation over here, and I plug that into the new one, which is using Heightfields, you might have noticed like there was no weight there. So what that means now is I can literally play back that simulation and see it kind of updating and redoing those splices. So I think this is why using Heightfields more to kind of almost do image processing for now is something you might want to consider if you do have any COPS tools that are a little slow, maybe not quite where they need to be, because you can move a lot of that logic across pretty easily. So yeah, that was a really bad explanation, but hopefully it made sense. Yeah. Okay, so it's 9:10 now. I don't want to take up all of our time. So let's see, VATs, we're going to go on a vote here. Substance or VAT 2.0? So VAT, who wants to see Vertex animation textures? That's what I thought. Okay, Substance plugin? So most of you don't care either way, you just want to get out of here. That's fine, we can do that too. If there's beer, we can drink beer. Okay, that was about the same number of hands. So I'm going to stay in COPS world and kind of just show you some of the Substance stuff. How many people here use Substance? Maybe that's a better question. Okay, a fair amount. Okay. So one of the things that we're trying to do as part of the game dev team is, and I'm going to switch across to this because it's only running on Windows at the moment, and so I'm not going to be able to actually show you that stuff directly. Is, you know, we're trying to make Houdini kind of the backbone to your pipeline. You probably all work in multiple pieces of software, and to have to jump between all the different software all the time can be a pain. Like if you don't have a TD or TA who's actually written tools to make that work easier, it can be tricky. And even then, like there might be cases where it's not possible. So what we're trying to do on the game dev team is kind of integrate as many of these other packages so that you can kind of stay in one place and do a lot of your work, and also be able to move data around a lot easier between them. And Substance seemed like a natural fit. It's really, really good at texture generation. It's also node-based architecture. But to be straight up, like they do a lot of stuff better than Houdini does. I've just shown you some of the limitations of COPS. And we actually, there was a Substance plugin that was available in shops. It was a material-based plugin, but that meant that you could only see the results at render time. And so it kind of defeated the purpose of being able to play with these procedural networks and then see the result. So just very quickly, we have the Maps Baker, which is a COPS-based or a Heightfield-based baker. So that just baked all of those maps in under 10 seconds. It's super fast, and that'll fit into kind of what I want to show in a second. And to give you another example of kind of how quick the Maps Baker is, this is a 4K normal map that is baked out on this object, and it takes just under 10 seconds. So if you're used to traditional bakers, they can take quite a while to kind of generate this data. Because of how quick this is, it means we can start doing some interesting things. And I'll skip over that for now. So what do we want to do with COPS, or with Substance, sorry. We want it to be COPS-based because COPS does still have a place to play. There's a lot of texture-based stuff that you can do there. And as I've shown tonight, you know, you can move data from your volume or your geometry into COPS. You can move stuff out of COPS back into your materials or your shaders. It gives you the ability to kind of work with all these different data types at the same time. So it seems like a good fit for Substance. The other thing is that we're actually doing the development on this plugin, so we're working with the Adobe team to kind of develop this. But the responsibility is on us. The previous plugin was developed by a Allegorithmic, and when Adobe bought them, the guy that worked on it got moved on to something else. So here's a basic idea of it. Essentially, you can load in a Substance archive, and then it will expose all of the typical settings that you would have exposed in the Substance archive. So for those of you that are not familiar with Substance, it's basically like a digital asset. You can make your node network, expose your parameters, and then that's what becomes available. So what we're doing here is we're bringing that in, and we're getting all of the different exports from that Substance archive. And then because you can assign COP outputs to materials, we're applying them directly to material that we can see in the viewport, and now we can start doing some changes. So what this means is we've essentially got a full loop of working with your mesh, working with your baking and your textures in kind of one system rather than having to jump between multiple packages. So here's actually just subdividing the mesh using the displacement map that was generated by Substance and then applying that to this object. So that's just a very basic kind of idea of how this might be used. And this is kind of what I was describing. You want to be able to load in your model either through ZBrush or photogrammetry or directly in Houdini, bake those maps as quickly as possible, feed those into your Substance archive because it can take inputs as well as give you outputs, and then use the outputs to actually load onto the materials. So this means you can actually make a change to the mesh, bake those maps, see the changes to the Substance archive, and then have that back on the object almost in real time. Like at this point, I would call it runtime. So let's have a look at a slightly more complex example. The idea here is we've got our mesh which has UVs on it, which we're just using the UV layout for. And then we're using that to basically figure out curvature and occlusion. And that's actually then being passed through to the Substance archive in order to set colors. So we're just using the colors based on curvature and occlusion to kind of generate the material. Now, the problem comes in where you get a new asset or an update to the asset and the UVs change. So now everything breaks. So what this now would allow you to do is we've got a little script that will basically bake out the maps again based on the new UVs, pass that into the Substance archive through COPS. And because that's all kind of a live system, we immediately get to see the new results on the material in the viewport. So now we're getting a much quicker turnaround time when working with this. And this is taking an even more complex mesh. So this might be your high-res, like finished mesh. And because it's all procedural, you just change that mesh, run that script again, and you basically get back to your result without you having to do any of those typical manual steps that you would generally have to do with something like this. So I'll let that finish doing its thing, run the script. And there we go. So, yeah. So let's take that kind of one step further. Let's say that you actually want to be getting edge detail along your mesh, and you're not too sure what that's going to look like. So you want to kind of be changing your mesh and then seeing the results of the texture from that. What we have here actually is it's automatically running the script as soon as something changes upstream. So the idea is that if I wanted to change this quite drastically, then as soon as I select the last node in this network, it's going to automatically go, oh, there's been a change. It's going to run a script to bake the maps, process the archive, and then apply that back to the surface. So this is similar to the previous one, but once again, the idea is that you can kind of make changes to your geometry and then see the results of the final viewport render all in kind of one foul swoop. So yeah, that's kind of what's happening with the Substance plugin. Yeah.
Does it mean the Substance is running in the background, kind of like Houdini engine is running? Houdini is running in the background when you have Houdini engine plugin running.
Yeah, correct. Yeah,
So
that's a problem.
have an HDA that you can drop your manga that is doing that and push it in.
I don't see why not. Yeah, it should be possible. HDAs in Maya always get interesting when we start talking about textures, because when you load a digital asset into Maya, you've probably run into this. Material assignment and textures becomes a bit of a concern. If you're managing that, if you've got like callback scripts or something running on the Maya side to make sure that's being hooked up correctly, because I think right now the Houdini plugin, if the geometry changes, it basically removes the material assignments. So you'd have to just keep those updated. But I don't see why the Substance archive wouldn't be able to run as well. Yeah, if you do that, do you want to email me and let me know how you're doing it? Because we'll totally we'll grab those ideas and figure them out as well. Yeah. I think that's all I'm going to show for tonight. I hope that was useful. Any follow-up questions before we call it? Yeah.
Can we just get the quick elevator pitch? What's different with the Vertex Animation 2.0?
Sure. Quick elevator pitch. Okay, it's one slide. I won't go through all of them, but I will talk over the one slide, and then you can kind of see it happening. Okay, so this is basically a complete rewrite. The idea is to automate as much of this process as possible. So now what you can do is you actually set your engine preset, so Unity, Unreal, or your custom one. We've got a debug mode, so you can actually dive inside the network and see the results of the texture and the mesh, so you can compare the original with the previous one. We've now got a script that will create your shaders and your materials in Unity and set all of the settings for you. So once you've changed the texture settings, that's the one thing you do need to do, I can basically come back to Houdini, I can make a change to my settings in here, hit render, and that'll automatically propagate into Unity. So I don't have to touch anything after that initial setup. So for instance, if I want to go back in and actually change the simulation, so let's put a collider object in the way, and now I've kind of changed it out. Now I can go back, hit render, open up Unity, and then it'll load up exactly as it is. So if you've used the Vertex animation textures before, you'll know, let's see if I can pause this, all these settings over here, you would have to manually set every time you made a change on the Houdini side. That's all being done for you now. So that's totally automated, basically. We do have someone working on an Unreal version of that as well. It's a little trickier with Unreal, but we are trying to see if we can get it working. We have pad to power of 2 textures for texture streaming. That's the other thing we've added. And what else? We've got double textures. So if you're using an older game engine where you don't have access to HDR textures and you just have 8-bit, we'll actually write out 2 8-bit textures and then shift it to give you the precision if you still are running into jittering issues with it. That's the elevator pitch. I saw another hand go up. Yeah. Do we need to wrap up?
Yeah. We're going to close in 10 minutes.
Okay. Okay. Then I think we'll call it, and if you want, we can chat afterwards. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming.